Welcome back to another episode of Consciously Clueless. I'm your host, Carly, and I'll be your guide on this journey from cluelessness to consciousness and back around again. Today on the podcast, I talked to Jeffrey Boadi. Jeffrey is a health and wellness advocate that uses his platforms to share plant-based food and lifestyle info. He runs his own blog, The Wealth of Health, where he talks about everything from socio-economic issues and food poverty, racism and health, is veganism expensive, and much more. Jeffrey and I talked about really important things, like about how when you let go, really amazing things usually start to happen, or about how all change has to start somewhere. I really am excited for you to hear this episode. So thank you again for joining. I'm really excited to be talking to you this morning, or this afternoon for you, I guess. So this podcast is called Consciously Clueless. And for me, that was this perfect embodiment of what I wanted to talk about. And it's those moments where we feel like we're really conscious and with it, and we're totally killing it at life. And then those moments where we feel clueless and have no idea what's going on, and everything in between. So I'm kind of curious to just check in with you and ask, where do you feel like you are on that continuum right now?
I guess, well, especially it being an interesting time in the world at the moment, it almost makes you kind of zero in on a lot of your choices as well, because you've got a lot of time at home, a lot of time thinking to yourself. So I guess there's that kind of space to think a lot about your choices from a perspective as well.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that be your dietary choices, lifestyle choices, how you treat people, family, all those kinds of things, it all kind of zeroes in. So I think it's an interesting time, as I say, on that spectrum. Some days I can be really focused and conscious on what I'm doing, and other days it's, maybe not so much. It's all a bit of a balancing act at the moment. But in terms of trying to maintain a decent level, I'd say I'm trying to do my best there.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that has been really interesting during this time. And I've talked about this a lot, but it keeps coming up, just the idea of, I think I used to think of it as like, oh, take it day by day, or these last few months have made me really think, okay, everything is moment by moment.
Yeah, exactly.
It switches so quickly of what's going on and how I'm feeling.
Yeah, definitely. Which is why there's a book that I've read called The Power of Now. I'm sure you've maybe read it or heard about it, but that when I read that book, that kind of really shaped my perspective in terms of just being in that moment and not thinking too far ahead about the next moment, or thinking too in the past about what's previously gone on. And that changed life a lot in terms of my perspective and how I looked at things. Just maintaining that focus on, this is what's going on in this specific moment. Take it for what it is, accept it for what it is, and then just live life like that. So
absolutely. It's been a while since I've read that. It might be time for me to pick it up again and remind myself.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. I've definitely been meaning to give it a second read for sure.
So your Instagram page is full of so much good information.
Thank you.
And is such a cool, informative place to learn. And then it led me to your blog, which we talked about the other day. So I first want to just hear, how did you become plant-based? Where did that start?
Well, it's an interesting story, which I was thinking about it the other day as well, because it's been a long journey in that aspect. And I think where it started was my sister told me about a documentary called What the Health on Netflix. And I'd always been quite health conscious anyway. I'd played a lot of sport growing up. I thought I was eating a healthy diet for an athlete. Taking my vitamins, my supplements, and all that kind of stuff. And she told me about how this documentary looked at the links between diet and disease, and a lot of the political aspects of, government taking subsidies from certain, big industries for, to move themselves forward. So it really kind of piqued my interest, and I gave it a watch. And I watched it once, and then I watched it the second time again with my now fiance, and literally overnight cut everything out of my diet: meat, dairy, eggs.
Oh wow!
Gone. And I ate a lot of meat, dairy, eggs, and fish, like animal products. Obviously, growing up in a Ghanaian household where meat is just the staple, pretty much every dinner is meat, and every meal is there's an animal product on your plate. Otherwise, it's essentially not a meal. So yeah, just completely cut everything out. And I think it was mainly driven by, I'll say, a couple of factors. So the health side of things, in terms of knowing that I could maximize my longevity by cutting out animal products and adopting a plant-based diet. And then there was other things in terms of civil rights issues, which I've now kind of been more vocal about on my page. So in the film, it does talk a lot about how certain areas especially in America, they almost like targeted people of color. And a lot of the runoff from a lot of the agricultural waste is kind of pumped into these, communities of color, raising their disease levels massively. And I just didn't really want to be a part of that. I didn't want to partake in that in any kind of way. I mean, in terms of my personal health, I could probably get away with eating meat once a week, twice a week. Probably won't do my health, but I just didn't want to be a part of, supporting industries that I knew were doing so much damage on a human level or on an ecological level to the environment. It just didn't really sit right with me. So for me, it was a very easy decision to make. So yeah, pretty much an overnight switch, and then took a couple of months, say 6 to 8 weeks, to really kind of get an understanding of how to properly plan a plant-based diet. So yeah, it was, and again, now just, still doing it, still thriving, still feeling great. And I immediately noticed so many different benefits from it. So.
What were the benefits you noticed? I read an article that you wrote for the Medium.
Yes.
And that talked about that, but can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the immediate benefits that I noticed, my sleep was just unbelievable. So I'd always try and chase like 8 hours sleep. But I'd always feel tired in the mornings. I'd still feel tired, and I'd always have to have a nap during the day or at some point. But I've now just felt like I'd go to sleep very easily, and I'd wake up with energy. Like sometimes I didn't even have to use my alarm clock. I'd just jump straight out of bed with a lot of vitality and energy, which I didn't have before. I felt a lot lighter. I felt I had more energy during the day. In terms of my training in the gym, there's no difference there. Like I did actually notice that my recovery times got quicker from like heavy kind of, resistance training sessions. So yeah, I think the sleep one was really interesting though, because I'd always wondered why I was always so tired in the mornings, because that didn't really work. That didn't sit right with me. I'd think, 8 hours sleep was more than enough. So why am I tired? But now I have 7 hours sleep and I feel great in the morning. So that's been great.
So sleep was the biggest.
It was the biggest one for me, yeah.
Initial. In that article you wrote, which I really loved, about this idea of consciousness and clarity of thought, which I think you'd started to touch on, but I related to that on how it kind of was this catapulting thing for me to open my mind to a lot of other issues. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So yeah, I felt like just understanding where my food was coming from made me very inquisitive in terms of, okay, so now I understand that this is where my food's coming from. What about other areas of life? What can I look at? What can I focus on? And as I said, the main thing for me was the initial going into it was civil rights and health. But then I took the next step and understood exactly, how animals are treated in the industry and that kind of suffering that I didn't want to be a part of again. And yeah, when I mentioned that clarity of thought, I just felt like a sense of clarity and just a clear-headedness in a kind of everything that I did. And I was always someone who was quite inquisitive and questioning things, but now I started doing it a lot more, really kind of thinking critically about a lot of things. And I genuinely do feel that it had an impact, just based on the foundations of changing my diet. So yeah, it's been a really interesting journey.
Speaking from my own experience, I think I had this initial reaction, and coming from someone who grew up with a lot of privilege, as I learn more and more about the fundamental issues and some of our, like on a system level, there's that initial reaction of, oh my gosh, everything I know is a lie.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you have that feeling with learning about the food system, the agriculture system, and just what we're taught about diet?
Yeah, definitely. I think that was a big driving factor. I felt like we'd just been told the wrong things, and a lot of marketing. And I drank a lot of milk as well. So I think back to all the marketing campaigns with the milk mustaches, got milk,
all the athletes,
and athletes that I looked up to, and thinking, if they're drinking it, then obviously, I'm going to drink it and I'm going to feel great. So yeah, I just felt like there were so many things. And as you say, you get to a point where you look at these things and you're like, well, actually, I've been told certain things which I've now done my own research on, and they don't ring true. So what else have I been
Mm-hmm.
told that isn't true? So then you start becoming really inquisitive, and not so much like from a inverted commas conspiracy perspective, but you just, because there's so much that we have to unlearn and relearn, and we all have that critical thinking power to look at something objectively and make our own decisions and informed decisions. It
Right.
made me think that there's got to be other things out there that we've been told, maybe misled a little bit, just to fulfill a certain agenda. And as you say, in terms of what we've been told about diet, like, it's interesting because one of my friends went to America. When was this? Like 2012, and he kind of mentioned about the vegan diet to me, and I was like, I'm not sure about that. Like, where would I get my protein? How would this work? Blah blah blah
Right.
blah blah. And in my mind, I imagined just not being able to eat enough food. I just didn't how it even
Mm-hmm.
work, because it's been drilled into us: meat, protein, milk, calcium. It's just been, we've been hammered with it for so long. And then you open up your mind to that world of the plant-based diet, and you realize that protein initially comes from plants, and there are so many different plant sources of protein. So yeah, it definitely made me think that, we've been told a lot of things that don't ring true. So what else is there that we could potentially unlearn and maybe relearn?
Absolutely. Something you touched on that I want to circle back to that has been important for my journey, I just think in
Mm,
general, is this idea that you said you could probably get by health wise eating meat once or twice a
yeah,
week or whatever it
yeah,
is, but it sounds like you connected to the greater good.
yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Was that with veganism that you started thinking about like what your role was more
Yeah,
overall?
exactly. Because as you say, I think from a health perspective, if I was to eat, as I said, 90% plants and maybe that excess amount of calories from meat, it probably wouldn't impact my health at all. But again, you
Mm-hmm.
think about the way, government subsidies and all of these different things, and big, food organizations, and, even certain health organizations promoting foods that are strongly linked with these, degenerative chronic diseases. I just didn't want to be a part of that kind of whole thing. I just didn't feel comfortable being a part of that. And that's why it's an
Mm-hmm.
easy decision for me to make. And people, I get the question of people going, "Oh, you're still vegan, or how long are you going to be vegan for?" And it's just like, me, it's just something. I just can't ever see myself going back to eating meat for any reason. There'll just be no reason to
Mm-hmm.
do it, just based on the fact that, as I said, when you think about certain civil rights issues, and so all of these different things that really make you think that, again, it's obviously bigger than me. As I said, from a personal
Right.
perspective, I could get away with it, but I don't want to be a part of like industries which are causing so much damage to certain pockets of society, and the animals as well. So yeah, that's, for me, it just didn't really make sense.
Well, and I think we often underestimate our own individual power
Mm, I think so too.
in in making these types of choices, and even just having conversations like this, and maybe even if one person is listening and thinks a little differently, but you see those arguments online. Why should I care about XYZ, really, whatever it is? Specifically, I see this when environmental or food stuff, if all these other countries or all these other populations aren't,
Mm,
like, it's just the whole thing's a
yeah,
wash.
exactly.
But it has to start somewhere. Maybe that's a little idealistic, but
Well, I think, as you said, we underestimate how much power we have as individuals, because if one individual goes, "Oh, I'm just one person," think about if 2 million people say, "Oh, I'm just that one person." That's 2 million people
right.
not having the opportunity to make a change. All change has to start somewhere. We're not going to hit that home run straight away when we're
Mm,
trying to make positive change. It's going to be step by step, and if it takes, weeks, months,
right.
years, then so be it. We're never going to arrive at that point that we want to straight away. And I think, because we live in this culture of convenience where we want everything right away, but people need to understand, make positive change, and to make big
Yeah.
changes, it's going to be that step by step process. So
So you've
mm,
mentioned a few times civil rights and how that was linked into your learning and your understanding. And some of the things you've been posting on social media lately
yeah,
have been really important
yeah,
and critical thinking, I think, especially because veganism has been a
yeah,
pretty whitewashed space. And I think that I don't know about the
yeah.
UK, but I think in
In
the
the UK
US
as
it
well, yeah,
has.
for sure.
And yeah, and so I would love for you to talk a little bit more about the
Yeah,
conversations you've been starting
yeah,
about race and food, and some of your posts have not only come from a historical perspective, which I think was really interesting, but then also the current climate.
So
can you
if
start to touch on
I
that?
guess, go on the basis of like food insecurity, for example, as I mentioned in America, there are a lot of food deserts which are primarily, people of color. There's actually a film coming out called They're Trying to Kill Us, where they actually talk about how, it's strategic in the way that they place, certain fast food joints in these, pop communities of color where there's no supermarkets for miles. So this is like the only source of food that they have. And when you think of, there are a lot of these statistics that I've been putting up recently as well, like black people up to 50% more likely to get cardiovascular disease, 40% of 40% and upwards of black people between the ages of 20 and 45 have high blood pressure, 3 to 5 times more likely to have type 2 diabetes. So if you think that a lot of these foods are obviously so strongly linked to having a poor diet. So if they're then putting these nutritionally deficient foods into these communities, what's then going to happen? Those disease rates are just going to go straight up, chronic disease through the roof. So for me, that's something that I've been vocal about that, and obviously having even seen it personally with my dad. Obviously we've been fortunate enough to not live in a food desert, but he's had certain cardiovascular events due to high meat consumption, for example. And I guess come back to in African culture where there's this high meat consumption in that culture, which doesn't actually correlate with the origins of our diet. So yeah, I think, as I said, from that civil rights perspective, it's difficult to see that a lot of these food deserts, in the United States and obviously in the UK as well, are populated mostly by black communities and low-income communities where they're not able to get access to healthy food, and it just increases their disease rate. So for me, that's something that we have to be vocal about.
Absolutely. So you had a post about what you just touched on, the origins of the diet a little more. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I thought it was really interesting and something we don't talk about enough too.
Especially in African culture, we've been conditioned to believe that meat is the staple of our diet. Think back to, even ancient Egypt, there was a lot of plant-based foods that they were consuming, and a lot of the ancient grains come from like a lot of West African areas. So foods like fonio and teff, millet, these are all grains that are, local to, these countries on the continent. So, and meat consumption, there was some meat consumption. I'm not going to say that we were fully plant-based. There was some, but nowhere near to the levels of what's being eaten now, which again is driving up those chronic disease rates. So it's just about getting that kind of information out there, because even coming across it myself, it was quite surprising because, growing up in a Ghanaian household, it was just meat all the time. Go to parties, events, it's just meat galore. So you think that's just how we're supposed to eat. Trace it back to the origins of our dietary frameworks. It's a lot more plant-based, a lot of grains, a lot of whole grains, fruits, vegetables, all those types of foods that, and those are the ones that have, kind of left the diet essentially. And now I'm just going to put that information so people can start to put them back in there. And mainly for health reasons, because as I said, if people still want to eat some meat, then that's absolutely fine. But if you combine that with a diverse range of plant foods, your health outcomes are just going to be much better.
Did you, I'm circling back again, did you watch, I'm sure you have, The Game Changers?
I did, yeah.
Okay. That was, I think, such an important film
it was,
to be made, because it was a really good perspective. And I think what was huge and eye-opening, and I hope continues to grow, is this idea of the systematic issues and kind of like what you're talking about with food deserts and with not understanding origins of our diet. And something they brought up was marketing.
Yeah.
So like marketing to those communities, or just marketing in general, that their example about how, there used to be commercials with doctors smoking cigarettes to promote which cigarette was like the best before doing a surgery.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think that's another example, I guess, of one, really targeting certain communities with advertisements and information, but also just the systematic issues.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that's touched on in the trailer that I saw for this film, They're Trying to Kill Us. Like the tobacco companies, alcohol companies, fast food companies, they actually target communities of color. It's all by design. if you put fast food restaurants in these communities, people are ultimately going to go and eat there. And then if you think about it from a socio-economic perspective as well, a lot of these foods are within their price range of these low income.
Right.
So it's almost like even if they wanted to eat healthy, because these really poor quality foods are subsidized, that's what's in their price range. So they can't actually get the fruits and vegetables and the healthy foods which they know are ultimately healthier for them, but it's just not within their budget. So that, again, that's something that is really, it's just systematic targeting of certain communities, because you know that they don't have the financial means to actually eat healthier. So they're literally eating essentially what they have, what's in their price range, even though they know it's killing them.
So I believe you had an article on your blog about is being vegan expensive?
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit more about that, since we were just talking about, access to food?
Yeah, but I think in the UK, we're getting an understanding of, well, people think that eating vegan is expensive, but that's when people are focusing on the meat substitutes and all the vegan ice creams and those kinds of things. Fruits and vegetables are actually relatively cost effective. Beans, cheap, like canned beans are really cheap. Rice, potatoes, all these foods, like they're all cheap. I think from what the research that I've done in, for example, food deserts in the US, those foods have for some reason spiked in price. And again, that's probably even more of a clear proof that they're trying to kind of price them out of the range of, communities of color. So they're forced to eat certain foods, which are ultimately going to make them sick. And then you bring the pharmaceutical element into it as well, where you've got, that industry thrives off people being sick ultimately.
Absolutely.
In terms of medications and long-term drugs and surgeries and procedures. So yeah, it all ties in, and it's very, very, it's a worrying situation.
Yeah, it's also, when you start diving into it, the different connections between all the systems is a little overwhelming too.
Exactly.
I think, like bringing in pharmaceutical and big agriculture and all those things.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, it was watching that film, What the Health, it was such an eye-opener, understanding about how they're all interlinked. And I guess, as I said, that's what kind of taken me on this journey, just to put the information out there for people who may not be aware of it, essentially.
So is that what made you start using your Instagram and starting a blog and doing that thing, is just really wanting to disperse information?
That's exactly it. For me, I think having this information that I know now, it's no good to keep it to myself. It's good to put it out there to people, because if I can make, as I said, just one person make a positive change in their life, then I've done my job. But obviously my idea is to create a community, to create a movement, essentially, for people to just get healthier, to eat more plant-based food. And it's not specific to people of color, obviously, even though that's very, very important to me. Obviously anyone can make changes and be healthier in their lives, but I say particularly for people of color, just because of the disease rates that we have, the propensity and the disproportionate amounts of disease that we have in our communities. So for me, it's so important to get that information out to people and not keep it to myself, because keeping it to myself is no use.
I love that idea of, well, I have this information, I might as well share it.
Yeah, I think
that's really beautiful.
Yeah, because I think ultimately, like my definition of success is, I guess, how much you impact other people. That's the one. Impacting other people. And I've had messages from people saying, they're always asking me certain questions, and I've had messages going, oh, you've been really impactful, like some really, really humbling messages on Instagram that sometimes I don't even think I deserve, because I'm just like, I'm just sending the information out there. I shouldn't be congratulated or thanked for it, but it is nice to hear that what I am doing is having a positive impact in people's lives. So I just want to just keep doing that, and as I say, keep growing the community, keep reaching more people with positive information, because ultimately, without your health, there's not much else.
Yeah, it's such a baseline for everything, right? And I don't think we value that in our Western culture.
Yeah.
In a way, even just the way we look at food as just this thing to shovel in at meals, instead of looking at it as something that provides us nutrition. And
Exactly. But I think, again, it's because that's not the messaging that's been put out there. A lot of the food and a lot of the adverts that we see, it's all linked to, the enjoyment of food and how well it, obviously food tasting great is important,
right.
But the fundamental, the real point of food for me is to fuel the body, is to fuel the cells, it's to provide us with energy, provide us with vitality. Obviously, it tasting great is an amazing byproduct. And I've loved cooking way more ever since going vegan. Like,
oh, me too.
I never was a cook much, but now I'm just creating so many different meals, and again, that's something that I do love sharing as well. And there's such a big vegan community where there's loads of different meals, and we will just share the food that we create just to inspire people to see what they can make.
But you're right, we were not given the message that food is medicine, weirdly enough. No. So one of the things you talked about was, can we trust the media for nutritional advice? So, I mean, I think we have some clues on where we're going with the answer to that, but it's an interesting question. And that's another one I think that's hard for many, myself included, in the beginning, to wrap my head around. Like, why wouldn't I trust everything I've known about food?
Well, this is the thing. And I think because the media is we almost can't get away from it. It's such a powerful entity on so many levels that people, when they see whether it's the news or something in the newspaper, they immediately just take it as gospel. I was probably guilty of doing that in the past as well. You see a big, or news channel, you see someone wearing a suit, they look like they know what they're talking about, and you just take what they're saying. They must be right. So I guess I wrote that article just to kind of highlight a few things in terms of how the media they thrive on confusion, because what it does is it gains clicks, it gets, people buy the newspaper, because if they run the same narrative about nutrition, there's nothing, people just get bored of that.
Oh, they thrive on confusion. Say that again.
Yeah, because I think, in one article you see plant-based diet is great. In the next article you see, our vegan diet's making you dumb. Then you see something about the keto. Then you see something about paleo. And then because what they want the clicks, because that is important for their longevity as it's almost like it's a sales plan for them, essentially.
Right.
So we need to just be aware of that and really kind of discern and do our own research about nutrition. And it can be a chore, but I think that's the only way that we're actually going to find the truth, is that if we dive deep into certain research and look for it ourselves and come to an informed decision. Because I think a lot of people maybe aren't making informed decisions about whether it be food or whether it be about lifestyle. They're just making choices that have been pushed onto them by, as I said, media entities or personal personalities in the media and things like that. So yeah, it's about making those informed decisions.
Well, and I think we think of food as outside of almost like research and science in some ways. Like, food is just food. Yeah. At least that's how I thought of it. Because even going to get my undergraduate degree, learning about how to trust or not trust research and discern when to do that, look at who's funding it.
That's the key one right there.
Right. And in my head, that made sense in like every other avenue.
Yeah.
But I didn't connect it to, who's funding that study that showed this new diet makes the most sense? Because like you said, we just learn that food is food.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that one really changed the game for me, is starting to look at where those studies are funded.
Yeah.
And it's wild.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I think there was a recent one, I think it was talking about how people on a vegan diet are more prone to depression or something like that. But if you eat meat, then you're not. And I was just like, let me go and have a look at this study just beyond the abstract. And then in the conclusion, it said something along the lines that there was an unrestricted grant from the National Beef Association or something along those lines. And it just makes sense. You tie two and two together. But the problem is, people who read that media article maybe wouldn't go and take that extra step to go and look at the research paper beyond the abstract and go deeper into it. They're just going to take it on face value and run with it.
And like you said, it's just the headlines are such clickbait that then it gets shared.
Exactly.
It's disseminated, and then people are like, that's what they equate. Even if they don't read it, that peripheral kind of, I saw that article and
it was on the BBC, so it must be right. Look at this.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's so interesting. I've seen a lot of this popping up again lately, which I love. But there's this idea of, like you said, even, and I thought the same thing, when you start thinking about being vegan or plant-based or even just eating healthier.
Yeah.
It's like, where am I going to get my protein? Or, what if I don't get all of this or whatever it is? But when I
Yeah.
wasn't vegan, I knew nothing about nutrition. I couldn't have told you how much protein I was actually supposed to get or getting. But
Yeah.
suddenly, when you're vegan, everyone's really worried about your protein intake. Or if you struggle with depression like I have, there's that, well, like, was it around when you started vegan? It,
Mm.
and as if like that's the only thing that could be affecting it and not all the other food or all the other parts of life or whatever it is. Like, really shouldn't be worried about like people eating Big Macs every day and the link to depression. Or it's wild how it suddenly becomes the scapegoat for all health problems.
It's very strange. I think you hit the nail on the head there when, there's no questions when people are eating unhealthy processed foods, junk foods, in these restaurants. No one questions anything when people are smoking, even though we see the clear link between smoking and lung cancer.
Right.
As soon as you change your diet, and let's be clear, like, you can obviously have an unhealthy vegan diet. Anyone knows.
Oh, absolutely.
That's it's important to be clear, but a healthy, whole food, plant-based diet has clearly been shown to be a superior diet for health in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
So for some reason, people seem to equate, everyone wants to become a nutritionist when you become vegan.
It's so true.
No one ever meant, I didn't even know what B12 was before I was on a plant-based diet. And I'd never heard of it. I'd never really focused on, I took maybe a multivitamin every now and again, but I wasn't so dialed in now with my nutrition, in terms of knowing what nutrients I'm getting, where my food's being sourced from.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, again, I think for me, it's not just about going plant-based. It's about actually being really, really diligent with how my nutrition is. And obviously, there might be time I might have some vegan ice cream. I might have a vegan burger on occasion, because you've still got to enjoy it from time to time.
Absolutely.
But I've just got such a more of a rounded understanding of nutrition, just how well it impacts the body if you do it right.
Yeah, I think that ties back to this kind of consciousness and clarity of thought, at least for me,
Yeah.
is just understanding food more. Like, there was this clarity of, the judgment I had for those diets or just the misinformation. I didn't know anything to the contrary, though.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, I didn't know what B12 was either.
This is the thing. And I think it's been such a good learning journey for me as well, just understanding everything around my nutrition. And it's not, I always look at different aspects of it as well. I'm trying to take a real holistic approach to my nutrition. I'm always going to believe that the plant-based diet, unless the science radically changes and it shows that eating meat is great for you, which I doubt that's ever going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always good to listen to other opinions and other points of view, but to come to make an informed decision based on the research that I do, the people who I listen to, who are pioneers in the space, whether it's doctors or certain personalities who have a great understanding of plant-based nutrition, doing the research myself, and just being knowledgeable in the sense that what I'm doing from a dietary perspective is really the best for my health, but also the best for the environment and the animals as well.
So when you started learning, you said What the Health was kind of your entry.
Yes.
Into, how long did it take for you to kind of start diving into the animal rights issues or the environment after that initial health perspective?
The finding out about how animals are treated probably took another 2 months, I think. It was interesting because I went plant-based. I was like, right, this is my health, civil rights issues, this is what I'm doing. And in that time, I'd actually bought a wallet, which was leather,
mm-hmm.
but I'd not really it hadn't really clicked in terms of how the animals were then treated for consumer goods and for food,
right?
And how they're kind of, how they suffer essentially. So now, again, that was another step in consciousness. So if I want to buy a pair of trainers now, for example, I'll always make a conscious decision. So there's loads of brands now that are bringing out vegan leather trainers, pineapple leather. So you don't actually have to contribute to that. So as I said, I'd say it took another 2 months for me to really understand what was going on there. Then, you watch all the videos in the slaughterhouses and how they're treated for food, for consumer goods and those kinds of things. Again, so that was another thing that I wanted to kind of really get an understanding of and know what was going on there.
So you mentioned growing up in an African household and how meat was really central.
Yeah.
When you went plant-based, did that confuse any family members, or did you get any comments or anything? Or I'm curious how that felt for you, if you want to speak to this from a cultural perspective, because I know I grew up in a small town in northern Minnesota. And so I think for a lot of people, like hunting and fishing,
Yeah.
Growing up doing those things that feel really central to your group of people, which I did as well,
Yeah.
it's hard to want to step away from something that feels like it was a part of you. But that's where I started to think about, like, even if I enjoy the time I spend with the people doing those things, it was like the greater good thing started to kind of keep coming into my head. So how was that for you?
It's interesting, actually. My parents thought I was really strange to start with. Why are you dropping me? Why are you doing this? Blah, 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 blah. And obviously I told them about the documentary. I tried to get them to watch it. They didn't really want to have any part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess like it kind of slowly got easier in the sense that my mum started getting more of an understanding of what I was doing. Like obviously when I was living with her, she started, she was still cooking me certain meals, but she knew to maybe add beans instead of meat. So she was helpful in that regard.
Right.
And then I mean, my dad was a little bit more stubborn because as I said, he had a couple of cardiovascular events. One that was in my late teens, and then another in my mid-20s. They were like mild heart attack and stroke. So I really kind of wanted to push him in that, not push him, but kind of guide him in that direction of just reducing the meat consumption and just increasing the plants. And he just wasn't really having any of it. But I wasn't surprised anyway. I knew it would take time. And interestingly enough, my parents are currently in Ghana at the moment. And my mum actually called me maybe a month or 2 months ago. And she'd said that they'd actually stopped eating red and white meat. And then they were only eating fish, but eating loads of different plant foods and
Oh, wow.
and that kind of stuff. And for me, that was a very, very big win, and it was a very surprising, but I was very happy to hear that, because it just shows, and this has obviously been 3 years in the making, because I've been nearly 3 years in August since I went plant-based. But for them making that change and making that decision to move away from meat, even if it's just for the time being, but I'd like to see it go on a lot longer. That's really,
Right.
really amazing to see, because not only are they going to be adding more years onto their life, they're going to be healthier, they're going to be happier. My dad was even saying that he felt lighter, he felt great. And just hearing those kinds of things it was music to my ears. So really.
Do you think the connection to your dad, you anticipating maybe that taking a little bit more time, is the tie to meat and diet and masculinity?
I'm not sure if it is with him. It was maybe related to the masculinity element. I think it's probably more the cultural side of things. Just
Okay.
eating meat as a Ghanaian man, you've got to do that. It's just part of the culture. It's ingrained in the culture. But I think, as I said, I reckon my mum was probably the one who maybe was driving the consumption of less meat and more plants, and obviously a little bit of fish in there as well. And obviously him on board, he would have probably been a bit of a tough nut to crack to get him to do it, but he's enjoying it from what I've been hearing from him. I speak to them regularly, so yeah, they're really happy about it. And obviously I'm just happy that, as I said, especially for my dad, where he's had certain health issues, he's really going to be adding years onto his life.
That's amazing. Good for them.
Yeah, definitely.
So the vegan scene in the United States feels like it's been really booming lately, and options even at restaurants that you wouldn't expect to. I mean, just from a marketing standpoint, I think it's a smart idea to have those options, right? As it's part of the current conversation. How is it in the UK?
Yeah, it's definitely getting a lot bigger in the UK as well. You're seeing a lot of pop-up events that are starting. Lots of vegan restaurants popping up. Like there's really, really good ones in London now as well. And yeah, as I said, certain restaurants you may not have thought would have had vegan options are now getting it at the very least 1 or 2. And in most cases, you have like a vegan section at most restaurants. So yeah, it's becoming really, really popular. I think more and more people are doing it. More and more people are becoming aware of the reasons as to why. I guess in terms of millennials, people wanting to have more of an impact on the greater good. So the environmental issues are something that people focus a lot on when it comes to turning to veganism. So yeah, as I said, it definitely is booming here, and I can only see it growing as well.
That's amazing. It's on my list of places to travel once all this is over. So hopefully someday I get to check out the vegan scene there.
Definitely. I'm sure you'll love it for sure.
So I'm curious as one of the things I think you list on either your website or Instagram is a wellness advocate. So what does that mean to you? Does that go beyond food, or what does that mean?
Yeah, so I think because obviously diet's important, but it's not the only thing that you should be doing to maximize your health. Obviously, I do a lot. I used to play football and travel to different countries to do it. So health, like fitness from my perspective is a very important thing. I always advocate for just consistently moving your body, even if it's at a low level. If you think about some of the longest living populations in the world in the blue zones, one of the things that is a staple for them is kind of low level exercise, but constantly. So they're constantly moving, constantly, whether it's gardening or going to see friends, they're always moving. And, in this kind of Western society where we're kind of a lot of us are chained to our desks and we're sitting in a fixed position, that's not really how our body is supposed to be. So yeah, I'm very, very big on movement. I think from like a self-care perspective, when it comes down to like meditation or reading or learning, whether it be, getting new perspective from a book or doing something along those lines. So yeah, I think just being an advocate for that, because if you're going to put out a message, you have to obviously embody that message as well and do those things that you're encouraging other people to do. So I'm always, whether it be reading, I love reading, always like training, keep myself healthy, because my aim is to live to over 100. I want to be one of those. That's one of my aims in live over 100, but live a long, healthy life as well. I just want to just kind of be an advocate for that and put that information out there so people can make, small changes in their daily life to kind of fuel them going forward.
Do you have a daily meditation practice or a regular practice that you rely on? Or?
The thing with meditation is that it's quite fleeting for me. Sometimes I'll be dialed in and I'll be doing it, but then other times I'll kind of just, not really be doing it as much. But I guess sometimes I kind of see, for example, training, if I'm in the gym or I'm in the park training, I guess that's almost a form of meditation for me. Get in my own space, not have to worry about anything. And it's just me and whether I'm on the gymnastics rings or whether I'm doing a run. So I kind of see that as somewhat of meditation. And sometimes even in the shower, I can just, stand there and just kind of be still. And that can maybe even kind of be a way of meditation for me as well. So I think when people think of meditation, they always think of sitting down in one place, with their eyes closed. But I think it can take on numerous different forms. But yeah, I think it's something that I want to do more of. And me and my fiance, we've occasionally done it with guided meditations online, which are pretty good. But definitely would like to get more of a routine going with it.
I'm so glad you said that, because I am definitely someone who sometimes like jumps all in and wants to do things perfectly.
Yeah.
And when I first started learning about meditation, I do have a daily short practice, but I was so like, it is sitting on your cushion and it is quiet time. And when somebody in my life was like, well, I think of it more as when I like go for a walk, I was like, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Just coming from such a place of judgment as if I was any expert. Yeah. But I'm so glad that you said that, because it is so much more. It's really just about being present. And I think that's something that I've had to learn as well.
Exactly. It's just about being in that present moment. And that could be doing anything, essentially. It could be, as I said, training in the gym, or whether it's going for a walk, for a run, in the shower, or you can be doing it sitting down, as most people do. But it's just about finding that time to clear your thoughts. And if those thoughts kind of come back into your head, just kind of try and get them out, or accept that they're there, but then kind of move forward and really just kind of get the understanding and clear your head and go from there.
So has the way you slow down or become present or kind of drop into consciousness, has that evolved over time?
I think so, definitely. And I think especially after reading that book that I spoke about, The Power, that has definitely taught me a lot in terms of just being in this present moment. Because there can be a lot to worry about in this world, whether it's, things happening to people that you love, or, finances or whatever. But just understanding that being in that present moment, this is all we're going to have. That's the best thing going forward, because I think as humans, we have a natural negativity bias to think of the worst thing that could happen. So if we're thinking about an event in the future, we're going to think of the worst case scenario. And it's often that we just make it up. Like it's a scenario that's not even happened yet. And we're just already, making ourselves terrified of it. So
creating a whole story around
exactly,
something.
something that hasn't even happened. We're creating a big story about how, things aren't going to go our way.
I am excellent at that. It is a practice I am working through. I am a great story creator for things that have not happened.
Yeah, I do that sometimes, but I've definitely got better at being able to discern that that's not like that's a situation that hasn't even happened yet. So just focus on the present, do whatever you can, as much as you can in the present, and the future will ultimately take care of itself.
Beautiful. So is there anything that you want people to know about you that I haven't asked yet?
Um, I think we've covered quite a lot, actually. I think if we go back to even before, like the whole plant-based thing, was I did touch on it briefly in terms of how I traveled a bit to play football. That was like my passion, my dream. I didn't quite get what I wanted to get out of the game, even though I traveled to a few places. I didn't, play for the teams that I would have wanted to, or have any longevity with that career. And I think that made me quite bitter in ways, because it was I almost felt a sense of, oh, I deserve this. Why? Like, in terms of my talent, I knew that I had the talent to play at a great level, but I just didn't. The pieces didn't go together for whatever reason. And it made me quite a bitter person. And I look back on it now, and I'm obviously a much changed person, and I owe a lot of that to, meeting my fiance, who was very patient with me at the time, and just accepting a new perspective, because my perspective was just football, and that was it, and nothing else. I didn't really want to think about anything else, and she kind of encouraged me to look at, being the kind of person that you are. You can do so many other different things with your life. You can start writing, you can start doing this and that, and it was quite hard to let go of. And when I started letting go, that was when like really amazing things started happening. I obviously came across this lifestyle and being able to know people going forward. When I think before it was mainly about what can I get? I want to play football. I want to do this. I want to do that. But now it's more about, how can I impact people? How can I provide people with information to live a healthy lifestyle? And for me, that's way, way more fulfilling than I think what I would have ever got if I'd got my way. So yeah, I think it's been a great journey. It's been a really impactful journey, and I'm only just getting started as well. So
letting go is when wonderful things started to happen. That's
exactly.
Beautiful. I also really appreciate you being honest about that, because I think we've all had those moments.
Yeah.
Whether they're moments or whether they're weeks or months or years or whatever it is, where you push through those feelings of, I guess, entitlement a little bit.
Yeah.
And being able to talk about that too is so important, because when you think back on it, or I think back on some of those moments I've had, I'm just, you just want to bury your head a little bit. But the way you talked about it is just, it was a part of the journey, and look what it did for you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important to recognize that, it's when I look at how maybe I was in terms of my attitude and the language and the way that I spoke, it was always quite negative. It was always quite bitter, quite angry. I think I like to look back on it, because I like to see how far I've come, and it's important to recognize that, it's obviously maybe there were certain things that I wasn't proud of, but that was an important part and an important step in my life, and maybe even a necessary step for me to take, for me to maybe not get something that I was so desperate to have,
right.
But then see the process of letting go, and now moving into a new, stage of life, and cultivating new dreams and things like that, and wanting to impact people more. And I think that's, for me, that's the most important thing, just being able to accept that certain things in your past are your past, but they've helped to shape me as a person going forward.
It must have been necessary, because here you are, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think I'd trade it for anything else, to be honest.
Oh, good. So where can people connect with you? Because they're going to want to after this interview.
So my Instagram page, Jeffrey Boadi, I'm sure you'll hopefully put it in the show notes or something.
Yes, I will.
I've got my blog page, which is The Wealth of Health, so www.thewealthofhealth.co.uk. I occasionally write articles for Medium as well, but usually post some articles on my blog. So yeah, my Instagram page and my blog is where you'll find me. Just continuing to put information out there so people can make longer lasting changes to maximize their health, longevity, and their consciousness as well.
And to live to be over 100 years old.
And to live to be over 100.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today about all this. This was so great. And I hope we get chances to connect further in the future.
Well, thanks for having me. Honestly, I mean, this is my first appearance on the podcast, and obviously I couldn't have started in a better way. So yeah, really grateful that you've had me on.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Consciously Clueless. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Jeffrey's openness and vulnerability is really inspiring and something I hope to take from this. If you are enjoying listening to this podcast, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and please share with anyone you think would be interested. If you leave a review on Apple Podcasts, you might be a review of the week in one of my solo episodes. I started getting such lovely reviews that I thought they needed to be shared. So you might be read on air if you leave a review for me. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day, and I will meet you here next week.